Hey, what up? Hey, check this out. It's a beach. Can you believe it? In Iowa? In April? You're right, this doesn't make sense. So we've been on a lot of different trails this whole month. We've been on a trail like you would find in Geode. We've been on a trail by a stream, we rode bikes on. We've walked around in the snow. We've walked around, on a mountain. And now, finally, we're going to end up on a beach. It's a funny thing about trust is that sometimes it can take in a lot of different kinds of paths, a lot of different kind of roads. Trust, as we've kind of seen this month, is putting your confidence in someone that you can depend on. That's a good definition of trust. This month, we've been looking at, who have we been looking at? Do you remember? We've been looking at Joseph. And Joseph, he's kind of an interesting fella, isn't he? In fact, if you would have only seen the first couple of weeks that we looked at Joseph, you would be like, trust? Why are we talking about trust with this guy? Well, today, I hope that by the end of it, you'll be able to see why Joseph put his trust in God, and we'll kind of talk about how you can too. So, let's kind of get in there, all right? So this week I want to pick up where we left off last week. Last week, we discovered that Joseph, he is finally the chief cupbearer, that he interpreted the dream correctly for all the way that we talked about, I guess last week, maybe 2 weeks ago? No, last week. And he remembers Joseph because Pharaoh has a dream. And Pharaoh has this really interesting dream, of 7 big, good, beautiful cows and 7 ugly cows. And then 7 heads of grain, good and full, and then 7 really gross and sickly green heads of grain. And so Pharaoh has this dream. Nobody else can interpret it. The chief cupbearer remembers that Joseph can interpret dreams. And so Joseph comes, he interprets this dream, and Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, he makes Joseph his second in command. It's kind of a cool deal. And Joseph, he oversees this massive effort to try and have enough grain, enough stuff to make food, enough supplies to make food to last during the 7 years of famine, out of the 7 years of good, the 7 years of plenty. And so he is doing this, 7 years comes up, the 7 years of famine starts. And all of a sudden, it's not just Egypt that's hit, it's the surrounding countries, the surrounding area that is hit as well by this famine. And in the surrounding country, this area called Canaan, is this family? Well, it's Joseph's family. It's Jacob and his other 11 brothers. 11 brothers. 11. That's right, I said it. 11. And so 11 brothers live there with Jacob, and food runs out pretty quick, as you can imagine. Jacob and the whole family, they hear that there is grain, there is food in Egypt, and so Jacob, he sends 10 of these boys, 10 of his sons, this is important later, you'll hear why, to go to Egypt to get more grain so that they can live and not die. Okay, this is a big deal. This is how serious things are with this. And so these 10 sons, they go and they get to Egypt and they find where the grain is located, and they go to buy some. Well, Joseph, he happens to be in the area and he recognizes his brothers, but they don't recognize him. And you might ask yourself, well, why is that? I would recognize my brother, I would recognize him, by the back of his hand. Okay, maybe not by the back of his hand. Maybe by the back of his head? I don't know. But good question. Joseph's brothers hadn't seen Joseph in 20 years. And while they may have not looked all that different, their beards probably, they were all older than Joseph. Their beards probably looked about the same, just a lot bigger. Beards grow over 20 years. And so Joseph would have recognized them. But Joseph, now that he was, in kind of this royal position in Egypt, this is a place where you didn't have facial hair. You didn't have hair, that you shaved it. Okay, and so that and Joseph being, second in command of Egypt, that wouldn't have been a place that that Joseph's brothers would think that they would find him. He was speaking Egyptian, and so this would not have been something that that Joseph's brothers would have known to be able to speak. And so just a lot of different elements there. So it's not really all that surprising that they don't recognize him. But Joseph for sure does. And now he has this plan in mind, and whether this plan just kind of comes to him or whether he's been planning on this for a long time. He's had 20 years, to think things through. And so here's the plan. Joseph's brothers, they come to him, and Joseph, because he recognizes them, he asks them about their family. He's very direct with them. And they tell him, well, we come from Canaan. Our dad, he had 12 sons. One is no more. They tell this right to Joseph's face, not realizing that it's Joseph that they're saying this about. And one is the brother of that one, and our dad, he wouldn't let him come. And so it's just us 10. We're here, and we need to buy grain for our family so that they can live. Joseph, though, here's his plan. He says, "Nuh-uh, I don't believe you. You're all spies. You're trying to find where Egypt is weak." And they insist. No. We're not spies, not at all. But Joseph, he continues to go about this, and he says, "Listen, if you're not spies, here's how you can prove it to me. This one," and he points to this guy named Simeon, and he says, "This one, he's going to stay with me, and he's going to be in prison. And then, if you want him back, you bring with me not only yourselves, but you bring your younger brother back with you the next time you need to get grain." Well, the brothers, they are in a tizzy about this. But they leave, they start to head back, they have to stop for the night, and they go to their sacks of grain, they get some out so that they can make some food, and they find the money that they would have used, that they had put out to buy this grain, right back in the top of their sacks. Can you imagine that they are perplexed by this? They are absolutely discombobulated by it. That is how they're just absolutely flummoxed by it. Did you catch all those words? That'll enrich your vocabulary. And they are just so absolutely floored by this. And they get back to Jacob, and they explain the situation. They explain why there's only 9 of them and not 10. And they explain that if they want to get Simeon back, they've got to bring back Benjamin, the youngest brother. They've got to take him all the way back to Egypt with them. And Jacob is just like, "No, there is no way that I'm going to let him go. I lost Joseph. What if I lose Benjamin? What if you guys lose Benjamin for me?" As if he's accusing them of losing Joseph. It's kind of interesting to see if maybe Jacob picks up on all this. And so finally, the grain, the supply for food just starts to run out. And so they sit down, and you can imagine them being over fire, and they're cooking up, what has to be about the last of the grain, or at least you can see the end of it in sight. And, with that being gone, man, there's not a lot of hope. And so one of the brothers, Judah, he says to Jacob, "Listen, I will personally guarantee his safety. Nothing is going to happen to him because I am going to put my life on the line for him." And so Jacob, whether it's because of this assurance from Judah or because grain is running out, he gives in. And so the brothers, again 10 of them now, they leave from Canaan to go all the way to Egypt to get more grain. And so they come, and they first off they find Joseph's chief of staff or whatever, and they explain the situation. They brought back double the amount of silver to pay for more grain. They explain the situation. Chief of staff says, "No, it's okay. But Joseph had to be in on this trick." And so they come and they have lunch with Joseph, which had to be kind of odd. They had to be kind of interested as to why. And Joseph, during this meal, he sees Benjamin, he sees his brother, and he's just like, he is torn up about it. He has to excuse himself. He goes, he has he has to cry a little bit because he's seeing this brother of his that had nothing to do with him being thrown in the well, and he's just torn up about it. And he comes back to the meal, and they have a good time just talking. He asks them about Jacob. He asks about his father, about how he is, if he's okay. And they, it had to be kind of weird, but they answer the questions anyways, and they tell him all of this stuff. And so he releases Simeon to him, and they start to leave. And in all of this plan, Joseph is just trying to see if their hearts have changed. And he has another part to this plan. These brothers, they leave with their grain, with all their supplies, and they leave. And Joseph, he has hidden this cup, this real special cup that he had, and he had this cup hidden in Benjamin's sack. Okay, and so they leave, and after they get a ways away, Joseph, he sends some of his servants, some of his people out to after them, and he's sending these people out after them because he wants his servant to ask him, why would you do this kind of a thing? He extended all of this kindness to you. Why would you do it? And so they do this. The servant, they catch up to him and they say, listen, this is the accusation. And Judah, he again speaks up because he has to guarantee the safety of Benjamin. He's like, nah, we couldn't do this. We brought back the silver that was returned to us, before. Why would we then go and steal this cup? No one has done this. Nobody would. But we'll go back. We'll sort this all out. So they return. They get back in front of Joseph, and Joseph, he's playing along. He's playing his role, and he says, okay, all right. So we're going to open these sacks, one by one, from oldest to youngest. Which, why his brothers didn't realize, that Joseph knew their birth order, and that wasn't like a key to them. I don't know. But they start. And they start at the oldest, they get all the way down to Benjamin, and they open his sack. Oh my goodness, there is the cup. What are you going to do? And Joseph, he said, before they start opening sacks, he said, nope, the one whose sack holds the cup, that is going to be they're going to be my slave. They're going to stay here with me. And Judah, he is just beside himself. And all of the brothers seem to be beside themselves about all of this. They do not want Jacob to have to suffer this shame. They don't want him to have to, be this sad anymore again. He must have been sad after Joseph, and they did not want this to happen. And Joseph's brothers, they are just beside themselves. And they're like, no, not just him, all of us. Let him go. We'll stay. We'll be your slaves. Let him go. And at this, Joseph breaks down. And he says, no. I am Joseph. I am your brother. Oh my goodness, can you imagine the tension in that room? Can you imagine, just everybody's feelings? To realize that your brother who you had thrown into a well 20 years before is right there in front of you, second in command in all of Egypt, the one who was holding your lives, your lives are at stake. They're in his hands, and he's saying, I'm your brother. Oh my goodness. And they are just overjoyed. And he sends them back to go and get Jacob. They bring Jacob back, and it's really funny because Joseph, he has such a good mindset about all of this. And guys, this is where I want you guys to come from when we talk about this whole virus and this whole situation that we're in. Okay? Because this is what Joseph says to his brothers. Okay? He says, and you can find this in Genesis chapter 50, verse 20. He says, you planned to harm me, but God planned it for good. He planned to do what is now being done. He wanted to save many lives. Guys, that's Genesis 50, verse 20. And that's Joseph's whole view of this whole thing. I don't know I don't think that was his view, the entire time. There had to have been times when he was just like, man, why is this happening? But he kept his faith, he kept his trust in God because he knew that God was working at it. And guys, that's the bottom line. That's the thing I want you to get above all from this week, from this whole talk about trust. It is this, that you can trust that God has a plan. And guys, that's difficult, but I want you to imagine, I want you to think about sitting down, because remember that first week we talked about how Jacob, he lied to his brother Esau. He stole the blessing from Esau, from his dad Isaac, and then he left and he went and he fell asleep, underneath all the stars and everything, and he saw the angels walking up and down, the staircase, up to heaven, and God spoke to him. Can you imagine, sitting down at Jacob's feet, and when he's telling these stories? They didn't have TV back then, and so all they had was just stories. And can you imagine, being Joseph and sitting down and hearing that your dad had heard, from God himself? Can you imagine if you believed that and you took it seriously? That God himself had spoken to your dad. And that because of that, you can see the evidence of it. You didn't see your uncle for a long time because your dad was afraid of him because of how he had treated him. You maybe walked past that pile of stones that your dad had set up to remember that place. And your dad maybe pointed it out, and Jacob maybe pointed it out to you and said, hey, that's where I fell asleep that night. And that's where I had that dream. That's where God spoke to me. Guys, do you suppose that maybe that helped Joseph have trust? Now listen, I get that maybe God hasn't spoken directly to your dad. But here's the thing. We can trust that God did speak directly to Jacob. He did speak directly to Abraham. And we can trust that because we know what God has done. We know that God sticks to his promises. Because we just learned about Jesus rising from the grave, right? That's a promise that God has kept. Guys, trust is putting your confidence in someone you can depend on. Guys, that's a huge, huge deal. I hope that you guys can put your trust in God. Now, if you want to know what that means, talk to your mom or dad. If you want, FaceTime me. I would love to hear from you. I'd love to talk to you about it. But, guys, that is really the most important thing. It's trust. And here's the interesting thing. Trust is going to lead into what we talk about next week. I'll see you guys then. I'm going to go enjoy some time on the beach.